Productive Pastor 59, Assimilation Systems. What's going on, friends? Great to have you back here on the podcast, episode 59, Assimilation Systems. It's going to be a baller of a conversation today, my friends. As always, you want to check out the show notes, revchatbrooks.com/PPP/059. Find out what you might need to know today about the episode. But before we jump into that, a couple quick things. Number one, how did you like the Pathways episodes with my buddy Fernie? 2 episodes in a row. And in a lot of ways, today is going to kind of be a continuation of that conversation, because in a lot of ways, assimilation systems are just pathways for new folks at your church. But how'd you like those? Fernie's great. Hope you went and grabbed his ebook. That you can find that in the show notes for both those episodes. So make sure you go and grab that. I get to see Fernie later today. I'm excited. I'm actually recording this episode, then finishing packing my bags, heading to annual conference, Louisiana. So if you're United Methodist, that's just the season for all of those things, and it's the time to do all of the stuff. So that's what I've got going on, but I'm sitting in front of you today. Second thing, the Trello course, it's coming up. I just got back from 5 days of vacation, was making notes, doing stuff there, doing the same thing here. That's going to be released this month. And we're going to talk about Trello more in this episode, because I think it's a fantastic tool for these sorts of things, especially for people who are more visual. That course is coming up. There'll be an introductory price for the first weekend it's out, and then they'll kind of go up to the permanent price. But keep your eyes and ears open as that's getting developed out. So we're going to just get done with all this front matter and get straight on into the main conversation about assimilation systems and those basics that are there. So this really is going to be kind of a one-on-one thing. I did an episode way back in the long ago of this really super complicated assimilation system that we were using at our new church start, 7-8 years ago, and it was really, really successful. We're not going to go that level of in-depth, because some of the ways that I think myself have changed from now. But I did this Twitter poll a couple of weeks back, and I asked people, do they have an intentional follow-up system for new folks in their church? And 45% roughly said they either don't or they do, but they don't pay that much attention to it. So half of the churches on that poll, and I think I had 45 people. So, it's Twitter accurate. We can do all that. But I'll tell you what, the more I have conversations with pastors of just normal-sized churches, the more I find out that, visitor assimilation is a thing that's... It's a struggle bus. It really, really is. I'm going to talk a bit more about that, why that might be coming up. But, assimilation systems matter. And when you have new folks come to your church, there's a level of intentionality about it. And I don't want to go, too much into just my own personal theology of the matter. But if someone shows up, I think that's a big deal. If someone shows up, I think that needs to be responded to. And I think that when we choose to not respond to it, or we might have something to say along the lines of, I'm just going to make this be super just informal and normal, I think we're actually doing a disservice to our church, but we're actually doing a disservice to that person and not honoring the fact that they made an intentional decision to show up at our church on Sunday morning. Something I learned years ago when we were church planning is this: that especially if someone does not already have church as a regular, normal part of their life, if they have made the decision to show up to your church whenever you worship on a Sunday morning or whatever it might be, that's a big decision in their life. We as the pastors, when we get overwhelmed or just thinking through things, or we might feel like parts of this can be icky, we choose to not make a big deal out of it. We're actually dishonoring the fact that this person, especially if they don't normally do church, or especially even more of that, if they're not a Christian, if they don't follow Jesus, if they make a decision to show up at our church, that's a really big deal. And I think that our response is actually a matter of faithfulness to Jesus, of faithfulness to the Holy Spirit and breathing your grace and all those sorts of things. And so I'm going to get down off of the theological soapbox right now and think about it, but I think we need to be thinking about assimilation systems. And I'm not always perfect as well. I'm rethinking these in my own context right now. So, let's do this and do a better job of this together. So, 4 things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about starting with the end. We're going to talk about collecting information. We're going to talk about your system. And then we're going to talk about some best practices. So, number 1, start with the end. This is pathways thinking. Something Fernie talked about in those 2 episodes is something I've talked about throughout the entire history of productive pastoring. Begin with backwards. Like, you always want to think about that preferred future. When you ask yourself the question, if you're sitting down to develop this intentional pathway, what does a disciple look like in my church, in my context? I think answering that disciple question is a huge component of your church's mission and vision. That's something you and your leaders should be involved in. Trust me when I tell you, the pastor coming up with that on their own or a staff member coming up with that on their own and then declaring that over everyone will be significantly less effective than the church missionally thinking through what does it mean to be a disciple in our context as a person in our congregation. And how does all of that affect the outcome of following Jesus? I think starting with this end in mind is huge because that's the first step, and it will inform you wherever you go from here. Whatever you decide to do as you're building out this assimilation system, is you need to understand what does a disciple look like in my congregation and in my context. Okay, number 2, collecting information. Now, this is where you see people ask questions all the time. This is where, most folks start out with. They just think about collecting their information, and that's not the best starting point. Remember, the best starting point is understanding what does a disciple look like in my church, in my context. Because here's the thing. When you understand who your church is reaching, when you understand who you're trying to reach, all those sorts of things, that will really inform what you are asking from people and how you are asking to get that from people. Because here's the thing. If they give you that information, then they are okay with you communicating in that way to them. So emails are different than phone numbers. Phone numbers are different than addresses. And all 3 of them are very, very different styles and points of communication. So think through what you are trying to collect and realize that in your iteration and in your experimentation, all those sorts of things, that what you're asking for and how much you're asking for might be the barrier you're having. It's about a level of intimacy. And what is this person willing to give you? Because remember, if they give it to you, that means they're expecting for you to communicate with them in that way. So you might be thinking about your culture and your context. Okay, what is the lowest barrier of entry of information someone is willing to give me? It might be their address. It might be their phone number. It might be their email address. And realize if they're not giving it to you, it's because there might be a reason. So if you ask for all 3 of those things and you consistently do not get people's address, you realize it's probably because they don't want you to show up at their house. The last church I was at full time, when we kind of did our welcome talk, I literally said, "Hey, fill this card out. I will not be coming to your house this afternoon. You have things going on, and I have things going on. But I want to send you something in the mail." Okay? If you're consistently not getting something from someone, they're probably terrified that you're going to abuse that level of contact. So think through, what do you need? And you'll probably be re-answering this question as you build your system. And so just think about that, but think about your context. Think about the age of people. Think about their expectation, all of those sorts of things. That's going to inform how you choose to get this information from people, okay? So, there's a fun, interesting running conversation right now about attendance pads. You might have gone to a small little church that had those in the past. Like, you literally have a pad that you fill out, and everybody fills out, and it just gets passed down the pew. It's how you record your attendance. It's how new people sign up, all those sorts of things. And here's the deal. I'm actually fascinated with these right now. I found a bunch of pads. I don't have the pad holders, but I'm actually considering bringing this back in one of my churches because I think it actually might be really, really effective because it's not just something that new people do. It's something that everyone does. And that is something I've learned before in the past. anytime you're just singling out a new person, the likelihood that they are going to do whatever this is slim to none. I remember when I was a kid, they would have you stand up in church if you were visiting. Friends, I mean, I grew up at a big church, and so this is, have 850 people in the room, and they ask visitors to stand up, and so others will greet them. I mean, that is a horror story that so many folks have. And so realize, you don't want to single people out. And the attendance pads are really, really interesting. There's connection cards. There's the paper card, which I did for years to a decent level of success. I'll tell you what, digital connection cards never worked. Like, I don't know if you're seeing that, if you're frustrated with that, as that was a COVID adaptation or whatever. I've not experienced digital connection cards to actually work that well at all. But just think about that. What information are you asking for? What I found out to be the biggest thing is the more you can create a culture where everyone engages with that moment, the greater likelihood it's going to normalize new people saying, oh, that's what we do when we come here. We fill this thing out. And one of the things I found that's great for that is for your new people to use that information to give you their information, but then also second for existing members to use the exact same thing for prayer requests. So if you're going to do a connection card, I would also highly encourage a turn-in portion that's about response or about prayer in those sorts of ways. That's what I have found out to be, really the most successful and the really most healthy. So whatever you do, you need to normalize getting that information. Now, I've got a good friend of mine here in Louisiana. She does something amazing. She's at a really traditional church still, and she walks out and processes and recesses. And so she shakes everyone's hand as they leave the sanctuary, and she's highly relational, and it's a smaller church, which means it's a highly relational church. And she just like flat out meets the guests and says, hey, give me your phone number real quick. And that's their contact point as a pastor saying, hey, I would love to pray with you this week. Can you give me your phone number? Would you mind doing that? And she does this whole face-to-face thing, and it works really, really well. And so, this doesn't need to be complicated, but it needs to be intentional. So think about this. How are you collecting information in a contextually appropriate way? That's the biggest thing. Just because so-and-so down the street does something, or just because, churches on church communication have all these fancy things, these kiosk stands, that kind of stuff, doesn't mean you have to do it. What is contextually appropriate? So the third thing is your system. Now, before we do this, you need to have a place to keep your system. I'm going to talk more about that later on, but, you can use Trello. It's what I prefer for this sort of thing. You can use your church database. Planning Center workflows are fantastic and amazing for this sort of thing. And you can assign tasks to it, all that kind of stuff. It automates tons of things. I like Trello because I'm a visual person. But you need to have your system somewhere to help you keep track. But this is the thing as you go in through creating your system. And I mean your system. What you're doing here is you're taking that endpoint, that definition of a disciple, and you realize that your assimilation system is the first step towards, discipling this person. And so think about that as you begin and you start working backwards as to what this looks like. But this is where I want to kind of turn around because assimilation systems have gotten overtly complicated in the last few years. I saw someone on the church communications forum talk like they had 17 touch points over the course of 6 weeks. Like, friends, this is crazy. It is nuts. It's the reason people don't give information is they're terrified of just being inundated with information. I saw a church literally have a no stalking promise on their website for their visitors. Now, I'm going to have other things to say about that, but it's a thing. It's a real deal. But think about it this way. This is where you can differentiate yourself. What are the questions or the needs of the person? You don't need to tell them about every single thing that's going on in the life of the church the next week. What is their immediate question? What might be their immediate needs? Okay? And so as you think through whatever, touch points you have of a 2-week system or a 4-week system or all those sorts of things, remember you do it in context, you do it in intentionality, but you make it about them. What are the things that they actually need to know or want to know? The second thing is this: there's going to be a place in this person's head, or this family's head, saying this: how will this church engage me if I were part of it? And the way that you reach out and your intentional system really does set the tone for this is what it means to belong to this congregation. So you see what I'm saying? If you don't have intentionality behind your system, if you don't have intentionality behind this person's visit, what gets communicated is this church really just kind of doesn't engage with people very well. Remember, you respect the fact the person is going to be showing up that Sunday morning. Now, with the system, this is where I've overthought things in the past, and this is where folks, they go significantly overboard. Whatever at one point in time is innovative will become aggravating one day. I remember probably 5 years ago, I bought a waterproof puffy blanket for hunting. It's camouflage. Yes, I carry a blanket with me, especially when I'm hunting in a deer stand in December or January. But I bought it for this thing, and the company wanted my phone number, and I gave it to them because people asked for it. I never had anything called back. I don't know what it's for. But then I started getting text messages from this company. Now, because I'm lazy and because I also don't want to go through the work of figuring out how to get them off, I still get text messages from this company. I now get text messages probably from like 10 different companies, and they're getting really aggravating. And just me going through this, you're laughing, saying, Chad, you can stop those. That's the kind of thing I procrastinate about. I probably need to take care of that one day. But now I get really frustrated when somebody asks for my phone number because I realize they're going to be bugging me all the time with this. That was really innovative 5 years ago, but it's aggravating now. Like when one of these companies sends me 5 or 6 text messages a week. So realize, don't go overboard here. Your context is everything. If you think about the questions, the needs this person has, and that your method of communicating to them will set their understanding of how this church will engage them if they're part of it, that's going to help you devise out what your system might look like and when it might be appropriate to put something inside of there. Now, if you want to go more and more in depth into developing a system like this, I'm actually going to do that in the Trello course. Not going to do it here for the sake of brevity. Remember, the podcast is a lot more of the what and the why. But think about this. Think about your system. Pop into the Productive Pastor community on Facebook. We can talk about this there. You can have folks just kind of share their system, talk about those sorts of things. In fact, we'll just do a thread for this episode in those sorts of ways. But the last thing on this thing about your system, a commitment to an assimilation system isn't a commitment to a specific process, but it's a commitment to intentionality. That's what I want you to take home from this section. A commitment to an assimilation system isn't a commitment to a specific process, but a commitment to intentionality. Now, some best practices, number 4, is how we'll wrap things up. Speed. Okay. This is the biggest thing that I've experienced in the last 10 years of the positive effects of having an intentional assimilation system. Hours, not days. I can't tell you how many times I talk to people, and this is what their church's assimilation system is. Oh, we'll give them a contact. We'll send them a text message or an email. The pastor handles it all. And when does the pastor do it? Whenever they can kind of get a hold, they can get a hand. Wednesday afternoon, Thursday. Friends, speed matters because this is you responding to somebody who's intentionally gave you their contact information. Okay? Hours, not days. I'm just going to tell you this right now. Best practice. Hours, not days. Whatever the first step is in your assimilation system, it needs to be happening Monday morning, and it needs to be a thing that person can see Monday morning. So what I'm telling you is, I would say either get a phone number and an email, or an email or a phone number and an address, okay? You don't need to just be getting the address, because the address communication, don't go show up. I know Adam Hamilton said when they were starting Church of the Resurrection, every Sunday afternoon, he went and visited people and gave them a mug, and 100% of the people, I know it, I've heard it from his mouth multiple times in all sorts of venues. But friends, that's 30 years ago. Don't do the mugging business where you show up at somebody's house, that sort of a thing. You need to have a digital form of communication. You need to have their address. That's what I think is just best practices, because remember, it's context and what's appropriate to communicate with somebody inside that context. But you need to have something that you hours, not days. You need to have a way to be able to thank that person for coming on Monday morning. Monday. Speed matters. And so if you try to do every single thing in one single communication point, it's going to be overwhelming. It's going to take till Wednesday or Thursday. If all you're doing is having a quick touch point, it needs to be something that can happen Monday morning. Okay, separation. This is a new thing that I'm realizing, and as we are kind of adapting to what this looks like now in our culture. Separation here. Okay, number one, pastors, if you're listening to this, which is probably 95% of the people, you've got a specific role in this assimilation practice, but then also your church has a role in this assimilation, pastor. And so you as the pastor, you are separate from the church as the entity. Now, the reason I say that is how many times does the pastor immediately begin their communication follow-up with programmatic stuff? Okay? Think through that. And what that instantly communicates is that the pastor is the touch point. The pastor is everything. The pastor is the church. This is what I have been experimenting with, and what I've been talking with others about, and they've been experimenting with, is this. That one of those quick early points of communication, and I think it should happen on Monday, maybe Tuesday morning, if something has already gone out like an email, is that when the pastor contacts that person, they contact that person as the pastor with a pastoral function. If you only have one thing in your assimilation system, and it's you get someone's phone number or email address and you do this, I think you'll be doing a good job. But what I like to do is reach out to the person. And this was the text message I have sent for years. Hey, so-and-so, it's Chad Brooks from insert church. It was great having you on worship this Sunday. Praying for you this week. Let me know if there's anything specific I can be focusing on. I reach out to that person with the pastoral function. I found that to be just much more healthier and much more contextually appropriate. Now, you can have the church send out stuff through email or text or mail, all those sorts of things. But the church needs to be communicating the entity, the program, that sort of a stuff. The pastor is reaching out to this person as the pastor. And if you're serving a normal-sized church, 100 or so, that's the way the pastor's going. And remember, you're setting the tone for what discipleship looks like. Are you discipling somebody into consumerism and a programmatic ministry that is exhausting, or are you assimilating them into a congregation of people who are following Jesus? That's where I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole too much, but I think that's something really, really important for us to be thinking about. What is the role of the pastor in this assimilation system? Okay, the next best practice is relationships. Remember, all of your steps, all the things that you design, they need to primarily be relational and about that person. Have you ever met somebody before and all they do is talk about themselves? That's aggravating. Now imagine if that person who's doing that is also texting you, emailing you, and sending you things in the mail and never asking a question, never doing any single thing to get to know you more. So as you develop these things, think about this. This needs to be relational and about that person. Keep that in mind as you design out who does these things and what. Who does this follow-up? How does that happen? All the sorts of things. That if your discipleship system in your church is actually decently robust and you've got plenty of leaders, it might mean inviting another leader to, hey, can you make contact with this person? Something we were doing ages ago when we were starting a church was we had a private Facebook group just for the leadership, like the named leadership in the church. And I would list out every single person who was a new visitor that Sunday saying, hey, does anybody know these folks well enough to follow up with them relationally this week? Keep it about relationships. Don't be that person that talks about themselves and doesn't let the other person get a word in. And the last best practice is this. Have a place. You keep this system somewhere where it can be seen, to where it can be learned from, to where it can be talked about. So keep it in Trello, keep it in the database, and it needs to be something that's in front of the church staff and the church leadership. You need to, if you can do it in a way, and this is one of the reasons I love Trello, when you can measure how well this is working, when you say you drop your system inside of Trello, inside of a card, and you've got a list for first time, second time, third time, the whole 9 yards, you can literally, part of your Monday morning task, your admin task, are moving people from this spot to where you can literally see this is how well this is working. And I'm not to say this to sound skeezy or to get into church growth, all these sorts of things, but from this deep, deep abiding belief I have that, if folks are showing up to your church on Sunday morning, it's a big deal to them. It's a big deal to them spiritually. They are making the decision to step foot in church in a day and age when people are intentionally making decisions to step out of church as a bunch. So this is a 101. It's a how. It's a why. Not so much a what. I know that you might want a lot of what. So there's some places a lot of what can happen. You can go ask what's over in Productive Pastor Community on Facebook. Join the private Facebook group, have that discussion there. Trello, of course, is going to have a module where we are building out an assimilation system using Trello. I'm going to go deep, deep, deep into the how as part of that. That'll be coming out in a few weeks. But let me know, what are the things that you're thinking about? What are the things that you are learning in assimilation? What are the ways that you are seeing success in this happen? This is part of what ministry looks like in the modern age. We've got to think through, people no longer feel obligated to be here, to be in church with us. They're not moving into new communities and saying, let me go find the church of my previous or my family's denomination. It's a very, very different story now. And remember, though, it's all about the commitment to intentionality. Hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to pack up my bag. I'm going to put a couple books in my box because I got to write a sermon while at Annual Conference. And then I'm going to be with pastors for 4 days. And it's going to be super exciting. I actually have big news to share. I'll share that on next episode about, one of the ways that my job, my role, my ministry is also changing. It's super cool, super fun. But until next week, I'm Chad Brooks. Thanks for being part of Productive Pastor. And I will see you on the internet.